On the broadcast tonight, President Park Geun-hye will shortly give a speech in the former East German city of Dresden. Now, she is expected to unveil a new vision for unification with North Korea. The UN Security Council condemns North Korea's recent ballistic missile launch as a violation of UN resolutions. And the U.S. Congress is with the UN on that. And Korea's industrial output contracts in February, but experts say this is a temporary trend and the economy will soon pick up again. Early edition at 6 begins now.
당신의 유럽은 어디였나요?
Excellence in flight. Korean Air.
It is 5 a.m. in Washington, 10 in Dresden, and 6 on a Friday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Gon-young.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us. Beginning our newscast today is President Park Geun-hye's state visit to Germany, of course.
That's right. The Korean leader is kicking off her 4th day in Germany, and today in the former East German city of Dresden. Now, the day before, on day 3 of her state visit to the European country, reunification continued to top the president's agenda.
She visited the remains of the Berlin Wall and met with the leaders of German reunification to listen to their experience. Our Choi You-sun, who is traveling with the president, files us this report from Dresden.
President Park, the leader of the world's only divided nation, visited a highly symbolic site of unity and freedom. Berlin's East Side Gallery is what's left of the Berlin Wall, covered in painted murals by more than 100 artists from around the world to commemorate the 1989 fall of the wall that led to German unification. The South Korean president also visited a photo exhibition that compares scenes from the demilitarized zone on the Korean peninsula and Germany's Grünes Bund, which is now an ecological park. The president had proposed turning the DMZ into something similar.
우리 나라의 DMZ도 언젠가는 평화의 상징으로 바뀌는 그런 날이 올 것이다 하는 그런 희망과 기대를 갖게 됩니다.
Staying with a reunification campaign, President Park met 5 former and current officials who were at the center of German unification, asking them to share their insights and wisdom. The group told the president there were frequent people exchanges between the East and the West that eventually led to a peaceful reunification. They said the German case is different from the situation on the Korean peninsula in that East Germans themselves had wanted change. At a luncheon with Korean and German businessmen, President Park vowed to prepare the Korean peninsula for a peaceful reunification. She then asked the business community to do their part in achieving a successful economic integration between the two Koreas. President Park is now in Dresden for the second leg of her state visit. Here, she is expected to lay out details of her reunification policy during a speech on Friday. Choi You-sun, Arirang News, Dresden.
As our Choi You-sun just reported, President Park is expected to unveil her vision of a Korean reunification in Dresden at the Dresden University of Technology. Now, Dresden is a symbolic city in German reunification as some of the most decisive events which led to the eventual fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and German reunification in 1990 took place there. Now, we will bring you a live coverage of her speech in Dresden starting at roughly 6:30 p.m. Korea time. Now, the nation is all ears for President Park's upcoming speech in the German city of Dresden, where like we said, she is expected to unveil her vision for reunification on the Korean peninsula. The location plays a significant role since Korea looks at Germany's unification as a model for its own. Our Kwon So-ah tells us what we can learn from the German case and what challenges remain.
Similar in many ways, but different in others. For a long time, the case of Germany's unification has been seen as a possible model for unification on the Korean peninsula. However, the biggest difference between Korea and Germany is the difference between South and North Korea. While East Germans were practically crying out for unification, South and North Koreans are divided on the issue. This is why analysts say trust will play a big role in laying the groundwork for a successful unification.
Trust from the North Korean people, trust from the international community, and then trust from ourselves. These three trust factors combined will make unification possible.
Experts say the difference between the culture and lifestyle of the two Koreas must be transformed into a sense of intimacy without pressing the North's people to change. South Koreans need to be convinced unification will enhance Korea's image, attract foreign investment, and eventually make a stronger economy. Also, just like Britain, France, and the US agreed to Germany's reunification, Korea must receive consensus from nations concerned, namely the US, Japan, China, and Russia. Although experts do not think Korea's will become one overnight like in Germany's case, there are lessons to be learned.
Germany did not actually prepare for a reunification, but as West Germany liquidated the Nazis, they achieved a civil society and transparent politics, which eventually made them an advanced democratic nation. Also, they achieved the miracle on the Rhine River that made them a world economic leader.
North Korea's weak economy means the North would gain a great deal through reunification, but its constant provocations and unpredictability could prove a thorn in the side of progress on the matter. Experts say that while North Korea has expressed an interest in reunification, it doesn't want to play second fiddle to the South during the process. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, defense officials from South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. will soon meet in Washington to discuss the North Korean nuclear threat. They will be following up on what the leaders of the three countries discussed on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague earlier this week. Our Shin Se-min explains.
South Korea and Japan may not share the same understanding of history, but one thing they do have in common is a desire to keep the peace in Northeast Asia. Seoul's defense ministry said Friday that South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. will hold defense trilateral talks on April 17th and 18th. They will include the deputy defense ministers from the three nations and represent the sixth such talk since 2008. The official says discussions will center on strengthening cooperation against North Korea's nuclear threat and the possible restart of six-party talks. The nuclear program will also be a point of emphasis when the top nuclear negotiators from South Korea, the U.S., and Japan sit down for talks soon. The discussions will center on strengthening cooperation against North Korea's nuclear threat and the possible restart of six-party talks. No details on when and where they'll take place have been announced. Both the defense talks and the future meeting between nuclear negotiators were proposed earlier this week when the leaders of three countries met on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Korea struck a deal on Friday to export 12 FA-50 fighter jets to the Philippines for $420 million. The FA-50, a variant of the T-50 Golden Eagle supersonic trainer, is built by Korea Aerospace Industries. Under the terms of the government-to-government deal, KAI will deliver the jets to Manila in the next 38 months. It follows similar contracts with Iraq last year and Indonesia in 2011. KAI also has its sights set on selling the FA-50 to Peru, Botswana, and the United Arab Emirates. The contract comes after President Park Geun-hye and Philippine President Benigno Aquino signed a memorandum of understanding on expanding the defense cooperation back in October. The UN Security Council has strongly condemned North Korea's recent ballistic missile launches, calling them a clear violation of existing resolutions. World powers, however, are less clear about what to do next. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The UN Security Council has spoken with one voice on North Korea's launch of 2 mid-range ballistic missiles earlier this week. Expressing deep concern after a closed-door meeting on Thursday, the 15-nation council said it would hold consultations and respond appropriately to Pyongyang's latest provocation. The council's president, Luxembourg's UN ambassador Sylvie Lucas, said it was a clear violation of Security Council resolutions. Despite concerns that they wouldn't, North Korea's biggest ally, China, supported the statement, but only to a point. Experts say it's unlikely Beijing will give its backing to additional economic sanctions on the North. In 2006 and 2009, the Security Council slapped 3 sanctions, banning the North from launching any type of missile that has ballistic capabilities. They followed North Korea's first and second nuclear tests. The Security Council expanded sanctions after another nuclear test in February of last year. North Korea fired 2 medium-range Nodong ballistic missiles into the East Sea in the early hours of Wednesday morning, Korea time. It was the first such mid-range missile launch since 2009. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Well, the United Nations isn't the only one mulling over additional sanctions on Pyongyang. U.S. Congress wants to hit the leadership with more punitive measures for its brutal repression and abuse of the North Korean people. Here's our Connie Kim.
The United States is attempting to fast-track legislation to impose fresh sanctions against North Korea for its grave human rights abuses. Speaking at a congressional hearing on North Korea, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce, said Washington will take every measure to hold the North Korean leader and his aides responsible for crimes against humanity. The bill is designed to directly affect the regime by cutting Kim Jong-un off from his hefty finances. It includes plans to ban financial institutions and other countries from having any kind of trade or cash transactions with Pyongyang. This would have a significant effect as North Korea is believed to have billions of dollars tucked away in various tax havens. The legislation, dubbed the North Korea Sanctions Enforcement Act of 2013, was proposed by Royce in April last year to further isolate Pyongyang from the international financial system. However, a report published by the U.S. Congressional Research Service suggests the bill could cause friction with South Korea, especially if Seoul decides to expand its joint Kaesong industrial complex with North Korea. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
We're all destroyed.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online, connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best, with Moon Gon-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Proposal for talks of holding regular reunions for families separated by the Korean War. Their reason.
Korea's industrial output dropped in February for the second straight month, raising concerns the domestic economy is not, in fact, on track to a strong recovery. Business sentiment among Korean manufacturers last month also remained fairly weak. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Korea's economic conditions might not be improving as quickly as many had hoped. Statistics Korea said Friday that the nation's industrial output shrank 1.8% last month from January, marking the second straight month of decline. The agency attributed the drop in output to slowing production in the nation's auto sector, which fell more than 7% in February on month. It cited fewer exports of Korean automobiles to the United States due to the harsh winter there and consumers waiting for the scheduled release of new models. The agency added that the decline is most likely temporary because the output numbers from January to February improved from the fourth quarter last year. Experts, however, remain dubious about the strength of the recovery this year. They say the domestic economy faces an uphill battle in trying to maintain the pace of recovery seen in the second half of last year.
If the economic growth rate reaches 1% every quarter this year from a quarter earlier, like the second half of 2013, the economy will be able to expand over 4% this year. But for now, that remains questionable.
The Bank of Korea data also showed that business sentiment among Korean manufacturers remained weak last month. Although the index reached 81, up from 78 in February, the reading is still below the benchmark 100, which means there are more pessimists than optimists. The central bank expects the Korean economy to grow 3.8% this year after a 3% growth last year. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Despite slow economic growth, the majority of Korean lawmakers and high-ranking government officials seem to be enjoying their share of the pie. According to data released by the ethics committees of the country's legislative, legal, and administrative bodies, 60% of more than 2,300 officials saw their wealth increase last year. The jump was attributed to a rise in the appraised value of land and personal savings. The average wealth of the officials stood at roughly $1.2 million, although they do not include 4 lawmakers whose net worth totaled over $46 million each. President Park Geun-hye's total assets came to over $2.6 million as of 2013, and that's up $250,000 from the previous year. The nation's financial authorities are gearing up for stricter guidelines on how customer information is shared between financial holding companies and their affiliates. The Financial Service Commission and the Financial Supervisory Service are reportedly looking into instituting the changes as soon as May. Under the new restrictions, financial institutions would need to get prior consent from customers before sharing their personal information to other parties. They'd also have to use client numbers instead of resident registration numbers. The changes were spurred after the personal data of up to 20 million Koreans was leaked from 3 credit card firms back in January. Moving on to other parts of our world, the international community is tightening its vice on Russia over its annexation of Crimea. The United Nations, the United States, and the International Monetary Fund are coming to aid of Ukraine while lobbying fresh sanctions toward Moscow. Our Kim Ji-yeon has more.
The United Nations has thrown its support behind Ukraine and further isolated Russia from the international community for its actions in Crimea. The General Assembly approved a non-binding resolution that affirms Ukraine's territorial integrity and called the referendum for Crimea's succession illegal. 100 member countries voted in favor of the resolution, with 11 voting against, 58 abstaining, and 24 absent. The United States is applying pressure to Russia while supporting Ukraine. U.S. Congress is promoting bills that would provide $1 billion in loan guarantees to Ukraine and $150 million in direct assistance. The House of Representatives is expected to approve the legislation Friday in Washington, which the Senate passed the day before with bipartisan support. The legislation is known to include more senior Russian officials and corporations that will be subject to asset freezes and travel bans. The U.S.-based Visa and MasterCard companies halted transactions for Bank Rossiya after it was placed under the sanctions list. In response, Russian President Vladimir Putin stressed the need for Russia to develop its own payment network. Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund is rushing to help Ukraine. The IMF approved a 2-year loan of up to $18 billion for the nation, which is on the verge of default. Analysts say Ukraine's state liability has risen to nearly $13 billion this year alone. In return, Kiev promised to undertake economic and energy reforms. Russia has cut off $15 billion in aid to Ukraine since the ousting of former President Viktor Yanukovych. A top Ukrainian defense official, Andriy Paruvi, said in a webcast from Kiev that nearly 100,000 Russian forces are stationed on the eastern borders of Ukraine, near the cities of Kharkiv and Donetsk. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, 30 years ago this Friday, the very first mobile communication device was introduced right here in Korea.
From car phones to pagers and cell phones, and there's smartphones. Before that, there were those phones with color that just blew our minds away. And I hear today's children, they get scared or shocked when they realize they need to press buttons sometimes because we have all those touch phones these days.
Well, you know, the development over the years has just been remarkable, and our Son Jung-in gives us a rundown of Korea's mobile devices since 1984.
Mobile phones have come a long way over the last 30 years in Korea, and it all started with the car phone. Despite it costing a whopping $3,700 in 1984, which back then was almost as expensive as the car itself, car phones created a buzz among the wealthy, and the number of subscribers had surpassed 2,000 just 1 month after being released.
The phone was very big and many people were curious and asked if they could touch it or use it.
Then in 1986, the beeper, or as it's known in Korea, the 삐삐, came around. It was the nation's very first portable mobile device. It soon caught on, and carrying a pager on your belt became a fashion trend. Then in 1988, Seoul hosted the Summer Olympic Games, the same year that mobile phone services were first introduced. The phones, which were as big as bricks, launched the era of Korea's mobile communication industry. 8 years later, the world's first CDMA-based digital cellular service began in 1996, which was a stepping stone for the wireless technology to expand its territory. The number of cell phone users surged to over 10 million in just 3 years.
Korea easily adapted to the mobile devices, which changed people's daily activities and the productivity at companies.
Korea was once considered a wasteland for mobile communications, lagging 40 years behind the United States. But today, the nation is widely acknowledged as a world leader in the IT industry. 손정인, 아리랑 뉴스.
Well, let's now get a check on the weather forecast with our Michelle Park. Michelle, we had another beautiful day here in Korea, but many of us are looking toward the German city of Dresden right now, where President Park is just about to give a speech. Well, tell us, how is the weather there?
Well, it's pretty chilly and raining in Dresden right now, where the highs later in the day will hit up to 13 degrees. However, the weekend looks promising there. Now, Saturday's supposed to be warm and sunny with a high of 17 degrees.
Okay, let's come back here in Korea. How's the weekend shaping up for us?
Well, sorry to break it to you, Daniel, but we are expecting some nationwide rain tomorrow, clearing things up on Sunday. Now, temperatures will remain warm throughout next week, so we should be able to see the blooming of cherry blossoms by next weekend in Chungcheongdo province. Now, going over to our temperature readings, Seoul tops out at 13 degrees in the morning and gets up to 18 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will get up to 17 and 15 degrees. Now, moving over to other regions, Jeju Island can expect it up to 19 degrees. Dokdo peaks at 16, while Mankumgang tops out at 11. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
And that brings us to the end of our regular newscast.
But of course, we have special programming, President Park Geun-hye's speech in Dresden, Germany, and we'll be back with her live speech from the Dresden University of Technology right after this.
So stay tuned.
우리 나라의 DMZ도 언젠가는 평화의 상징으로 바뀌는 그런 날이 올 것이다 하는 그런 희망과 기대를 갖게 됩니다. (25년) 전 동독 평화혁명의 서막을 열었을 뿐만 아니라 통일 후 첨단 산업을 중심으로 역동적 경제 성장을 이루고 있는 작센주는 여전히 분단된 한반도에 살고 있는 우리 한국인들에게 많은 교훈을 주고 있습니다.
President Park Geun-hye is today in the former East German city of Dresden. Now she is on this Friday at the Dresden University of Technology to receive an honorary doctorate from that school.
The Korean president will give a speech to the students and faculty there where she is expected to unveil a new vision for unification with North Korea. We'll be bringing you a live feed from the Dilfer Hall in about 10 minutes' time.
Right, the president's trip to Dresden makes her the first South Korean president to visit the former East German city. Dresden is also symbolic in German reunification, as well as it is where former German Chancellor Helmut Kohl made a landmark pro-unification speech back in 1989.
And to help us through the live coverage and, of course, provide us with some very valuable insights, we're joined live in the studio by Dr. Choi Gang, Vice President of Asan Institute of Policy Studies. Thank you for making time for us, Dr. Gang.
Pleasure to be here.
And you will be aiding us and giving us some perspective throughout our live coverage and President Park Geun-hye's speech. All right, and we'll get right back to you. But as we wait for President Park Geun-hye to take the stage at the Dresden University of Technology, we take a look at what many consider to be a model for Korean reunification. I was in Germany recently and spoke to people who lived on both sides of the Berlin Wall until it fell in 1989. Here are the experiences.
Although more than 2 decades have passed since the fall of the Berlin Wall, remnants of it still stand in different parts of the German capital. For tourists, it's a must-see travel spot. For New Berliners, it's a part of history. For those who lived through it, it's a reminder of a sudden event that altered their lives forever. Along the Bernaustrasse, I met Reinhard Hummel, a former West Berliner who vividly remembers the day 52 years ago when he overnight found himself separated suddenly from the love of his life by a concrete barrier 3.6 meters tall. Reinhard, however, was able to see her on occasion.
I would go to East Berlin from time to time, about once a month, on a one-day visa.
On August 13, 1961, the communist government of the German Democratic Republic built a concrete wall topped with barbed wires between East and West Berlin. For the next few years, no humans would cross it. But that changed in the late 60s after the West German government, led by then-Chancellor Willy Brandt, implemented a new foreign policy towards the East. Change through rapprochement and a policy of small steps.
Wir alle haben lange genug auf diese Nachricht warten müssen. Von Donnerstag 13 Uhr an können die Westberliner die Passierscheine abholen. Ab Donnerstagnachmittag konnten also die ersten mit solchen Scheinen hinübergehen.
Willy Brandt's new Eastern policy provided us West Berliners and those who escaped from East Germany more freedom to travel around. The new Eastern policy made this possible.
Neue Ostpolitik, or the new Eastern policy initially designed to ease tensions between West and East Germany, would eventually lead to the German reunification.
It was part of our policy to keep up the connections between both parts of Germany and to perform a real human policy in the interest of the ordinary people in both parts of the divided country. This was a political aim, and the result was the unification very quickly in 1990.
However, the former West German ministerial level official admits that peaceful reunification did not come without a price.
We accepted that we have to pay for progress of any way in the human relations in the divided countries. We had to pay in political means, recognition to a limited extent of the regime, and of course in money as well.
Through these means, all Germans were able to come to public consensus that the lives of people on both sides of the border, especially those in the East, would improve in a reunified Germany.
We had a situation where the East Germans insisted on being part of the reunited Germany. It was not a main political aim of the West Germans.
This desire of East Germans, experts say, was key to the peaceful reunification of Germany.